Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast. The P.A.S. Report provides an honest analysis on the critical issues that matter to you without the biased media filters. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano. I got a great episode lined up. As always, make sure to follow and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. Visit the P.A.S. Report website, pasreport.com, and share this episode with family and friends and on social media. Now, another busy week here, all right? I hope everyone's doing well. I got 3 weeks to go in this semester, so it's good times over here. A little crazy, a little chaotic with all the papers coming in, but I'm getting through it. And today I want to draw your attention to an op-ed I wrote. It was published in Fox News. The link is available on the PAS Report website, pasreport.com. I strongly encourage you to give the piece a read because it's really important. It's an important opinion piece that explains how our government is usurping our God-given liberties. And unfortunately, they're being assisted by higher education and other institutions. This alliance is trying to turn Orwell's 1984 dystopia into a reality. Now, I know most people focus on the censorship aspect, and that's a significant aspect. I'm not downplaying it. But that doesn't nearly take it far enough. The government's efforts extend far beyond stifling free speech. The government and its partners, they're orchestrating a comprehensive campaign to control our behaviors. That's what it's coming down to. And it's because they don't trust us. They don't believe that we're capable of making good decisions. They view us as ignorant peasants. We're part of the peasant class. And since we can't be trusted to make the right decisions, they must control and manipulate our behaviors for what they deem as the common good. That's what it comes down to. See, as the government's power has expanded unchecked, our thoughts and opinions are increasingly subjected to their influence. We are subjected to these dehumanizing social controls, and it's essential that we recognize it. We, the people, we have to recognize that we also share a portion of blame, right? It's easy to point fingers solely at the government, say that they're nefarious, they're seeking to expand their powers. That's easy to do. But we have to acknowledge our own responsibility in this. How did we get here? And it's partly because of the erosion of our cultural identity. It's at the heart of this crisis. We've allowed a failing education system, which has transitioned from fostering learning and knowledge to indoctrination. And we've allowed it to persist for far too long. The constant assault on the concept of the nuclear family has further contributed to this erosion. We've decimated the traditional family structure, and we used to hold that dear, right? Now, over 50% of children being born today are born into fatherless homes. It's disgraceful. Incivility and violence have been normalized in our society. We see it daily, whether it's people berating store clerks over coupons that expired a year ago, individuals brazenly raiding stores under the false assumption that they could take whatever they please, teachers being subjected to insults and physical assaults from students. People think they can do whatever the hell they want without any consequence. And there is no consequence, right? Because we see these pictures and these videos on a daily basis, and nothing ever happens to these people. I'll talk more about it in a few minutes. Okay, but the absence of consequences has fueled the cultural rot that I've been speaking of for the last few weeks. It's leading to this loss of our cultural identity. But make no mistake, as our culture continues to decay, there's going to be a hefty price we pay. And the price is an ever-expanding government that has repeatedly abused its powers, that believes we the people exist to serve them rather than the other way around. A bureaucratic class that sees itself as rulers, not public servants. And if we choose to continue down this path, because it is a choice, we don't have to go down this path, sooner or later we're going to witness the complete societal breakdown. And this societal breakdown will be devastating. It's not just limited to the United States. Nearly every Western country is facing similar societal breakdowns the further they stray from the ideals of a free society. So in this episode, I want to discuss the choices that confront us. We have to reflect on the erosion of our cultural identity and the far-reaching consequences it has. And it's not just about diagnosing what ails the United States. I speak about that often. But it's about reclaiming our values. We need to stop letting others control the narrative and define who we are. We have to reconnect with our founding principles, steer away from the path that's going to lead us closer to this idea of societal breakdown. That's on us. We have to assume responsibility. Difficult times can make strong people. Unfortunately, we've been conditioned to be weak. We've been conditioned to just accept, to be obedient. And that's not the way the system is supposed to work. That's not what the Founding Fathers intended. And I'm going to get to it all when we get back from this quick break. So everyone hang tight. When things go sideways, you want to be prepared. Protect you and your family. And people are concerned. They might have to go for a long time without food, electricity. That's why I want to introduce you to 4patriots.com. Get preparedness products you could use now, and that could save your life later. My favorite is 4Patriots' new solar generator, the Patriot Power Generator 2000X. It uses the endless free power of the sun to power your lights, your TV, medical equipment, even run your fridge. Plus, it's expandable and comes with a free solar panel. Or you can pick up one of 4Patriots' best-selling survival food kits. Delicious tasting and designed to last for 25 years. They even have kits with real meat. And if the power's out, no worries. Just boil water over fire, simmer, and serve. You're going to enjoy a hot meal and stay safe in a crisis. More smart people than ever are finding 4Patriots. Over 2 million customers trust them, and you might have even seen them on TV. I had the folks at 4Patriots set up a special page for you at 4patriots.com/PAS so that listeners of this podcast can see this week's discounts and deals before they go away. Go to 4patriots.com/PAS, but you gotta hurry because the deals don't last long. So save more money, get peace of mind, and protect you and your family. Go to 4patriots.com/PAS. Welcome back, everyone. And I've been warning about the gross abuses of power by our government bureaucrats for quite some time. You know, they think they could do whatever the hell they want, consequences be damned. And they routinely show contempt for our history, our system, and our Constitution. They disregard it. See, the Constitution serves as an inconvenience to what they actually want to do. So they have decided that they're going to ignore their Constitution, that they're going to use backdoor attempts to usurp the authority laid out in the Constitution that limits government's power and strengthens the power that we, the people, have. So I'm going to jump across the Atlantic for a minute because it is relevant to what is happening in the United States. You might be like, wow, he's jumping all the way over across the Atlantic. We're going to go to Ireland right now. And last week, there was a situation that occurred. A man allegedly attacked 3 children and a woman with a knife. It was outside of an elementary school. And unlike here, bystanders didn't just, pull out their phones and start filming the attack and do nothing. The people of Ireland actually jumped in and potentially saved these kids' lives. So we should actually take note of that and start doing that here rather than filming it and hoping it goes viral. Maybe we need to step up the game a little bit. But since the attack, we've seen protests erupt. And what's this controversy about? Now, according to the reports, the man responsible for the attack is a naturalized Irish citizen of Algerian descent, and people are expressing anger at a broken immigration system in Europe, where those who immigrate to these countries fail to assimilate into the culture. They don't gain an appreciation for the country that they're in. And these countries, actually, you're seeing micronations be formed within these countries. This is not to say that natural-born Irish citizens don't engage in any violent behavior. They certainly do. However, when it comes to people coming from the outside, this type of violence is preventable. And when you're immigrating to a country, it's not a right. You don't have the right to go wherever you want on this globe. It's a privilege. So countries have a responsibility to their citizens first. And when you are allowing people into your country, ordinary people have an expectation that the government's going to do its due diligence when admitting people. Let's face it, you want people who are going to contribute to society, not be a blight on society. We already have enough of those. You don't want to incorporate more. That's not going to lead to a successful nation. But we're witnessing the opposite, right? And you're seeing the anger boil over in Ireland, and not just Ireland, in many European countries. People are upset that they are witnessing their cultural identities being degraded and destroyed. They're angry about the numbers flowing into their country and how a decent number of those coming into these countries show little to no appreciation or respect for the opportunities that they have been given. And their anger isn't necessarily towards immigrants. Of course, they're going to be labeled as anti-immigrant. But their anger isn't towards the immigrants. Their anger is towards the officials that they elected into office who have abandoned them. Now, after the incident, people began protesting the government policies. Some of these protests devolved into riots, but rather than officials coming out and saying that they hear the people that they're supposed to serve, instead they accused those protesting of being xenophobic, hateful, far-right bigots. Does that sound familiar to you? because we see the exact same thing here. Even in Ireland, if you question immigration policies, you're labeled, and it's all designed to marginalize and silence individuals. That's what it's designed to do. You have all these governments that are alienating their own population who elected them into office, who are targeting and attacking their own population. It's disgraceful, and it's clear that the officials in power have zero respect for the people that they serve. They ascribe the worst attributes and motivations to them. And it goes back to what I said before. They view ordinary people as ignorant peasants who should be dictated to rather than engaged with. Had officials come out and said, hey, listen, we hear you. We understand you. Well, people would calm down. They wouldn't be so angry. But you have this dismissive approach to genuine concerns of the population. They're worried about a dangerous trend, and it echoes the broader theme of eroding their cultural identity, and yet they're ignored. And when people feel ignored, or worse, when they feel vilified for expressing legitimate concerns about issues that are directly impacting their communities, it's going to exacerbate societal divisions. People are going to lose faith in the government, the established government. You're going to have this growing sense of alienation, and they're playing a very dangerous game, because I warned about it here. I've warned that our government is actually cultivating the next Timothy McVeigh, not intentionally. I mean, some want it to happen so they could justify the abuses of power. See, we told you the threat of domestic terrorism looms large, so some want it so that it justifies their actions and they could actually expand their powers. But most of these people are inadvertently creating the next Timothy McVeigh. And it's not just about how they feel about the people that they're supposed to be serving. The real danger lies in how they want to control the people. In Ireland, a law has been introduced that would implement speech controls. And anyone who violates what these power-hungry fools deem as acceptable could face up to a year in prison. Now, officials say that this law is necessary because it's about the common good. The common good. Take a listen.
When you think about it, all law, all legislation is about the restriction of freedom. That's exactly what we're doing here, is we are restricting freedom, but we're doing it for the common good. You will see throughout our Constitution, yes, you have rights, but they are restricted for the common good. Everything needs to be balanced. And if your views on other people's identities go to make their lives unsafe, insecure, and cause them such deep discomfort that they cannot live in peace, then I believe that it is our job as legislators to restrict those freedoms for the common good.
She doesn't hide the fact that she intends to eliminate people's freedom. She says that it's okay to eliminate freedom when the freedom goes against the common good. And I will tell you this, I don't care who is saying it, I don't care what their political ideology is, you need to be aware of those who want to restrict freedoms in the name of common good. They are the ones that represent the greatest threat to free societies. And it's ironic that those who scream the loudest about threats to democracy, they're the ones that scream the loudest about preserving this idea of democracy. They're the same folks that are the first who want to destroy every democratic norm and take away our liberties to usher in their warped Orwellian interpretation of democracy. That's what they want. And if you're saying to yourself, but Professor, this is happening in Ireland, that could never happen in the United States, well, you're wrong. There's a lot that I thought would never happen in the United States that has happened. And not only can it happen in the United States, it's already happening, and it is far more insidious than what's actually going on in Ireland. I'll explain that after we get back from this quick break. Welcome back, everyone. So before the break, I said that we're already seeing a move in the United States to implement similar types of speech controls that are being discussed in Ireland. So let me explain. A few weeks ago, I explained how the Stanford Disinformation Group was really created by the Department of Homeland Security. This group, it just shows the insidious relationship between the government and higher education, but it's not just higher education. It's a number of institutions, including major corporations that exist. And the way it worked under the partnership is that higher education institutions acted as conduits between the government and big tech to remove speech that government officials found unacceptable. And the only reason they found it unacceptable is because it didn't achieve their political ends. That's the only reason. Now, researchers would review this idea of misinformation. They'd receive misinformation reports submitted by federal officials compile lists of these offending posts, and then submit them to social media companies with specific recommendations. And the recommendations included posts being buried and undiscoverable. There were shadow bans that took place, suspensions. Some people were even banned from social media platforms. Now, given the evidence, we know that the effort targeted those who held opinions that went contrary to prevailing narratives. And especially when you're talking about things like the corruption allegations against President Biden, the integrity of the 2020 elections, COVID, especially the mask and vaccine policies, you have countless Americans, millions of Americans, were censored, silenced, and shadow banned during the 2020 election cycle. So it worked. Their efforts worked. It was part of an effort to exert control over our behavior, dictate what we, the people, are allowed to say, what we're allowed to see, what we're allowed to hear. And imagine what would have happened in the 2020 election had factual information not been suppressed from the American people. We have polls that do show that 1 in 6 Biden voters would have actually changed their vote. They either would have voted for Trump or wouldn't have voted at all, which could have changed the election. So we know it has real-world effects. We are witnessing the largest social engineering effort that's ever been embarked on. And they will say, well, it's for the common good, right? Can't allow all this misinformation and disinformation out there, but it's really about power. Every American should be aware of how all these different entities have created this alliance with the government and are working to actively assist the government in usurping our God-given liberties. Now, since the Stanford Partnership, the Biden administration issued the National Strategy for Countering Domestic Terrorism. I've broken this document down many times, so you could always go back, listen to the previous episodes, and I explain the document page by page and what's so frightening about it. But what I do want to talk about is how ever since the national strategy was issued in June of 2021, we have witnessed a plethora of new partnerships between the government and higher education, all designed to shape our perceptions under the guise of preventing domestic terrorism, preventing misinformation and disinformation that leads to domestic terrorism. In fact, the government has awarded over 500 grants and contracts related to surveilling the American people and suppressing their speech and opinions. And when we look at these grants, many of these grants have been awarded to higher education institutions and to private institutions. We are talking about tens of millions to over 100 million taxpayer dollars that's going to institutions to serve as the government's eyes and ears, to act as conduits to achieve their political agenda. Imagine. We are paying to have our own voices silenced and for the government to control our thoughts. It should terrify every American. But instead, what do you get? Oh, you're a conspiracy theorist. Oh, you're over-exaggerating it. It's not bad. Oh, the government should tackle misinformation, disinformation, despite them being the largest purveyors of misinformation and disinformation throughout history. And I want to make this clear. While conservatives may be the ones that are being targeted right now, all you Democrats and lefties better wake up out there, because soon you're going to find yourself as the targets. Anyone who dares to challenge the government narratives is going to find themselves in the government's crosshairs. When people look at the issue of censorship, too many people, they view all these programs as separate and apart from each other. However, you have to view them together like a puzzle. When you do that, you start to see what's going on. You'll see that they all stem from the national strategy, and they're all interrelated with a singular focus of controlling the people, making 1984 the dystopian reality. That's the real intent. And they don't hide it. They telegraph exactly what they want to do, whether it's the bozo from Ireland that I played earlier that talks about eliminating freedom in the name of the common good, whether it's Klaus Schwab from the WEF, where YOLO nothing and be happy, whether it's Hillary Clinton talking about formal deprogramming of Trump supporters, or President Biden labeling nearly half the country as the biggest threat that this republic has ever faced. It's all the same thing, control. So it goes beyond just silencing speech. It's about control. Remember, Carol Crawford, who worked at the CDC, pressured social media companies to remove posts that contain unapproved opinions, as if some government bureaucrat gets to decide what I can think. You have Jen Easterly, the director of CISA within the Department of Homeland Security, who stated how the government must be proactive and how cognitive functions, essentially how we think, should be categorized under critical infrastructure protection. That would be a game changer. It would give the government and its proxies far more control. Then you have the defunct Disinformation Governance Board that they proposed, which was nothing more than a Ministry of Truth. Since they couldn't do that, that's why they're outsourcing all of this. When you listen to their words, when you go through the programs and the funding, when you read their documents, it's all there in plain sight. This isn't rocket science. It's obvious. And they are conditioning Americans to be obedient. Take your soma and you'll be okay. You are seeing the Chinese social credit system being imported piece by piece into the United States. And we got this to this point because we have allowed the government to run rampant in the name of keeping us safe. We kept granting the government more and more power because we believed that they were operating in good faith. And we turned our backs on the founding principles of this country. We turned our backs on the founding fathers, the ones who defined this great nation. But the founders warned us, and we didn't heed their warnings. They created the most complex governing system in the world. Conflict was institutionalized. It was a safety mechanism to ensure that little gets done. They implemented a system of checks and balances, separation of powers, different branches of government. You have the idea of federalism, the concept of federalism, where you have the federal and state governments. The founding fathers did warn us that as the government grows, the government's going to acquire more power. As the government acquires more power, the government becomes more detached from the people. As the government becomes more detached from the people, it gets more abusive. They believed in the three principles of old republicanism, that governments are naturally going to be flawed because they're created by human beings, that liberty is best protected in the small state. It's why you don't want to entrust too much power in a central government, and that the government that governs the best governs the least. They wanted the government to be restrained because they weren't stupid. They knew that once they established this system, the government would inevitably grow more powerful. You didn't have to be a genius. They were smart. But they operated through common sense. They understood history. They understood human beings and how human beings operated and the motivations behind human beings. And that's why they made our government so difficult to navigate. But what makes this situation so dangerous today is how complacent that we've become, combined with a failed education system, particularly many within the younger generations, the younger millennials, Gen Z, who went through a public education system that never taught them to think critically. They weren't taught our history. They weren't taught what federalism is and why it's important. They have no idea how the system works. And remember the clip I played earlier of the Irish official. She said something in the beginning that's really important. So I'm going to play the beginning part again. Take a listen.
When you think about it, all law, all legislation is about the restriction of freedom.
She's exactly right. All legislation is designed to restrict human behavior in some sort of way. That is the precise reason why our founding fathers made the legislative process so cumbersome. They didn't want a legislative branch that's just going to churn out law after law after law. They preferred that Congress debates the issues, and only when they exhausted the debate, only when they believed that there were no other options, should they consider legislation. In fact, legislation should always be last resort. However, we now have several generations of Americans, not just the millennials and Gen Z, several generations of Americans that have an unfavorable view of Congress. And when they're asked why the overwhelming majority of people view Congress unfavorably, the number one response is that Congress doesn't do anything. Now, that's not a bad thing. The reality is that if Congress is passing laws, they are usually passing laws that curtail our freedoms in some sort of way and further empower government. So if they're not getting anything accomplished, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's actually a safety mechanism, and the only way to get things through is through compromise. Congress should only pass laws when it's completely necessary, but as I said, so many have been conditioned to believe that Congress should just churn out laws. And then you see the hypocrisy, because it's not about actually passing laws, right? We weren't, again, education system didn't teach people to think critically. It's not that people view Congress unfavorably because they're not passing laws. If Congress was passing laws that went against their ideological beliefs, it's not like they would view Congress more favorably just because Congress is doing something. It's the idea that they want Congress to pass the laws that conform to their ideological beliefs, okay? There's a little authoritarianism in each person. But more importantly, the younger generations, and that's the scary part because they're the future of this country, they were never taught the importance of liberty and freedom, and they were never taught how once liberty is lost, you may never get it back. I'm not saying that this is every young person, but it's a lot. It's why a majority of those between the ages of 16 to 29 believe the government should control speech and would like to see the First Amendment amended to ban offensive and hateful speech. But they were never taught to think deeper, and they don't realize that it's those in power that get to determine what's offensive and what's hateful. And what makes this so dangerous is you cannot defend what you don't know. If you were never taught these concepts about the United States, well, how can you defend them? Not only are they not being taught these vital elements that are necessary in a functional society, but they're actually indoctrinated with anti-Americanism and disdain for Western culture. They're told that they have to hate themselves because of the color of their skin, that they are either an oppressor or oppressed, a victimizer or a victim. They are being instilled with the belief that we are unable to function and govern ourselves, so we must empower the government even further. And it's an education system that's cultivating them to be lemmings. Well, one day, these are the future policymakers. Remember that. It's the same generation where speech codes were normalized on college campuses. Now they want to normalize social control on a mass scale. That doesn't mean that everything's going to go the way the government wants or anticipates. As they continue to build out this massive apparatus, there is going to be pushback. That's where you start seeing societal breakdown. And there are going to be those who will continue to speak out, including yours truly. I will continue to speak out until they throw me in some sort of re-education camp. But what concerns me is that if we don't stand up for our core principles, those principles don't survive. And we're not powerless. We can fix this. We can fix our broken education system. We need to start reaffirming that our rights are inherent, that no entity, including the government, is above the law, that no entity, especially the government, gives us our rights, that our rights come from a higher power. And we need to call on Congress to immediately investigate this alliance and the funding that's going to this alliance. They need to strip this funding away, start curtailing government power and government abuses. And if some members of Congress don't want to do that because they're afraid, they're too cowardly, well, then we need to vote the bums out of office. And any institution that assists the government in violating our constitutional rights should not be allowed to evade accountability. And this includes higher education. They need to be penalized. They need to be punished. So those that were affected by the censorship efforts from these institutions, like the Stanford Disinformation Group, they should be pursuing civil action against Stanford. When you have private companies that are engaging and assisting the government in usurping our rights, well, that's where you may want to consider stop doing business with those entities, punish them financially. Because if we start holding everyone accountable for their actions, these institutions are going to be less willing to aid the government in the gross abuse of power that we're witnessing on a day in and day out basis. I'm sorry, but we should not sit idly by as we witness the erosion of our freedoms. We cannot let the erosion of our freedoms go unchecked. We have to stand up for the American value system, for the American identity. Our country does depend on it. Now, if you found the content of this episode informative, I encourage you to share this episode with others, family, friends, and on social media. Take 30 seconds to write a good review and leave a 5-star rating on any podcast platform that allows it. I want to thank you for joining me today, and I'll be back on Monday with another great episode of the P.A.S. Report podcast.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast.
Have a good one. Bye.
Be sure to rate, share, and subscribe to the podcast so you'll never miss an episode. Also, visit PASreport.com and follow us on Twitter at PAS Report.